Quick, cover! It's an enemy attack! Stephanie narrowly avoided the energy blast from behind and rolled off the motorcycle, landing on the hard ground. Fortunately, she isn't a weak female scientist, but a well-trained undercover agent. When her body lost its balance, Stephanie curled up to protect her head and minimize the damage she suffered. Tank class, Aryan Superman. Stephanie, bleeding from scraping her elbows and knees, put her hands together and hid behind the bunker. She looked out and saw a burly German soldier coming after her. From the logo on the opponent's armband, it appears to be a Berlin-made tank-class Aryan Superman. "Hurry up into the tank. It's the only way to kill him," Stephanie shouted. She knew very well how powerful the tank-class Aryan Superman was. Bullets couldn't break their skin, and they could recover quickly even if they were injured. The tank, parked in the center of the perimeter, slowly starts it up, track rolling and moving forward. The cannon moved, and the main gun was aimed at the German soldier striding forward. Boom! The artillery missed the opponent. He moved so fast that the heavy tanks couldn't keep up at all. Monster! A British soldier with the submachine gun bravely stood up and attracted its attention. A single bullet hit the monster German soldier, sinking deep into flesh and blood without inflicting any lethal damage. Englishman! The German soldier charged forward and closed in on him. Each of his hands grabbed one side of the man's shoulder and pulled outward. Rip! The human body was like fragile tissue paper. It was directly torn apart. Blood splattered. "Give me that gun!" Stephanie snatched a Springfield rifle from the hands of a stunned soldier. She knew the weaknesses of a tank-class Aryan Superman. Boom! The sturdy blood-stained figure stomped down heavily and jumped high into the air with the help of the rebound from his step. Then, like a solid shell, with a thud, the German soldier jumped onto the tank. With both hands holding the thick cannon, along with a beast-like snarl, he twisted the barrel into a mangled mess. Is this still human? The British soldiers were instantly discouraged from fighting. Yes. He is still human and can be killed. Stephanie was on her stomach, staring coldly at the murderous German soldier through the scope of her Springfield rifle. She gazed with bated breath, waiting for the chance to shoot. "Freya, is that your name? General Salman asked me to take you back or kill you on the spot." The German soldier, who emitted energy blasts from his eyes, blew up the tank, and the soldiers inside seemed to have some sense and turned to look at Stephanie, laughing. "But I think it's easier to twist your head off." Boom! 7.62 metal bullets were fired at high speed from the muzzle. The German soldier opened his palms and covered his eyes. "Do you think I wouldn't guard against my weaknesses?" The tank-class Aryan Superman said contemptuously. "Want to deal with him? At least use rocket launchers, howitzers, and other heavy weapons. One rifle alone is not enough." "You're Stephanie." When the female agent was on the verge of despair, a steady voice came from behind. The tall figure, like a cloud, cast over Stephanie. She turned around, lifted her head, and subconsciously replied, "That's right. You're safe now." The tall man smiled and then asked, "Is that the Superman of the Axis?" Stephanie nodded. She didn't know who the other party was, so she recalled, "The tank-class Aryan Superman made in Berlin is a meat grinder on the battlefield. He's not something ordinary people could fight against. Aryan Superman." The tall man stepped out of the bunker, his voice drifting to the back with a light-hearted laugh. "You're the Superman of the Allies." The German soldier, who General Sankt had transformed, looked leeringly at the tall man coming out of the bunker. His tone was somewhat contemptuous. He thought that the Allies' legendary hero, and conquered Italy and Rome alone, should be Hercules. 2 meters tall, muscular, like the descendants of the Titans, particularly shocking-looking. But the Allied Superman that appeared in front of him was only taller than ordinary people, stronger than some, without the slightest exaggeration. Luke, who was 6.2 feet, 191 cm tall, seemed nothing in front of the German soldier, who was as big as a little giant. The muscles were even worse. The robust and influential body of the Allied Superman is still somewhat thin, in the face of a big man who seemed to have taken steroids. Only from the appearance, this fierce German soldier is as big as an unparalleled soldier, with a height of 8 feet and a waist circumference that could beat ancient generals. His rock-hard muscle was almost bursting the uniform open. Quite a bit of toughness, like an evil kinnikuman. "You look like a Boy Scout." The German soldier glanced at the young brigadier general and laughed at him, A creature like you should be very popular and well-developed if thrown into the British barracks." The humiliating sarcasm didn't irritate Luke. He turned to Stephanie and asked, "You said he was a tank class. Does that mean a more powerful Aryan Superman?" "Yes. The three that defeated the Soviet army were the battleship class, Aryan Superman. They're even more terrible," Stephanie nodded and replied. There was a slight worry in her eyes. Muscle is power and physique determines everything. This is a fact recognized by many people. Therefore, even if Luke showed a formidable strength, not inferior to that of the German Superman, Stephanie still had doubts. She saw with her own eyes how strong those battleship-class Aryan Supermen were. Tanks, bombers, thousands of soldiers. They were no match. Luke, the allied Superman, she didn't know if he could do it. Mindful of this, Stephanie clenched the Springfield rifle and prepared to support the young brigadier general if the situation got worse. "Let me introduce myself. My name is Julian. If I take your head off and bring it back to Berlin, the Führer will undoubtedly give me a big commendation, maybe even a medal like Siegfried." The German soldier, as sturdy as a giant, laughed heartily. Luke didn't answer him. There's no need to waste time with small soldiers. Generally speaking, lines were reserved for important characters. He took a heavy step, and Stephanie, hiding behind the bunker, felt the ground tremble with a jerk. The spider web-like cracks extended all around, and the tall, upright figure tore through the air, creating a strong air current. In almost one breath's time, he came closer to the German Superman. He made a fist with his right hand and threw it with all his might. Compared with before, at this time, Luke had been greatly improved in strength and speed. This feeling of making progress every day and every night and getting stronger every moment made him addicted. The pleasure it brings is even more significant than the human enthusiasm for bed activities. That was fast. With the enhanced optic nerve, Julian could barely catch Luke's movements. Feeling the heavy force coming towards him, he immediately put away his contempt. Allied super soldiers don't seem too bad. Julian shouted, his strength surged wildly, and his muscles twisted into a ball. He crossed his arms and held them in front of his chest. "Let me see your strength first." Julian's mind flashed this idea. If he had seen it with his own eyes, the mutant Colossus, who was killed by Luke with punch after punch, he wouldn't have chosen to do so. In a battle where there is little difference in strength, giving up the initiative is no different from committing suicide. What's more, Luke's real combat power was far above Julian, he just doesn't know it. Bang! The fist smashed into Julian's arms. Nearly 10 tons of terrifying force was poured into one point. Before the German Superman could react, his 2 arms cracked and broke directly from the elbow. Power could twist off the barrel of a tank. Muscle fibers were as thick as tangled steel wires, like being thrown into a blender, instantly shattered into rotten meat. Severe pain reached Julian's brain. Before he could scream, Luke's eyes were locked, and his left hand came out and pressed down on the German Superman's thick shoulder. Julian, who was as big as a small giant, like a child who could not resist, couldn't stand the copious force. His legs went soft, and his knees slammed to the ground with a thud. "I heard that the Führer in Berlin regards Aryans as the perfect race, and that a super soldier like you is considered an Aryan Superman by the Third Reich." Luke lowered his head and looked down with a cold look in his eyes, but now it seems like that's all there is to it. The great Führer. Julian's face was distorted, his arms showing the white stubble of bone, the flesh writhing with effort, trying to recover from his injuries. He looked at Luke, and his eyes turned blindingly white. "Long live the Third Reich!" The roar of fanaticism fell, and a significant energy fluctuation formed a powerful, dazzling light mass, which directly engulfed Luke. Like a massive ball of lightning, the air is burning with a sizzling sound, and a scorching smell spread out. The sound of explosions continued to ring out. The robust and rising smoke covered the battlefield, making it hard to see. "It's over." Stephanie was holding the Springfield rifle with a severe look on her face. She didn't think Luke would survive, knowing that Aryan Superman's most potent attack was to release energy clusters. Even solid and thick tanks could explode, not to mention the fragile flesh and blood of humans. He was careless and should have guarded against Julian's move, Stephanie thought with dismay. Julian moved so fast that she didn't even have time to remind Luke to be vigilant. Allied forces. Rescue. Failed. Stephanie watched the tall figure coming out of the billowing smoke, preparing for the final struggle. Anyway, she couldn't run far. Instead of fleeing in a hurry and being caught by the enemy, it was better to fight to the death. "Stephanie, you look nervous." Then a deep voice sounded, relaxing Stephanie, who was tense all over. She couldn't believe it and subconsciously asked, "Why? You're not dead." The smoke from the explosion dissipated, and the figure that appeared turned out to be Luke. He didn't know when he changed into a steel armor-like battle suit and removed the right palm firmly pressed on Julian's face. His skin surface is full of burnt black marks, but his body was almost unscathed. "Of course I'm still alive, Stephanie." Luke grinned. He raised his hand and lifted Julian, who was exhausted and fell to the ground. After the German Superman released the energy cluster, he degenerated into an ordinary person, like a machine that drained his opponent's energy cluster's fuel. "How can you call yourself a Superman?" Luke curled his lips. His opponent's energy cluster contained a destructive power that was difficult for ordinary people to resist. He suffered a minor injury. According to his estimation, the burst of energy clusters was almost equivalent to the explosive force produced by an anti-tank missile. However, with the self-healing ability from the Superman card, in less than 1 minute, the burnt wound on his right palm recovered as before. The battlefield on the Allied front quieted down. Only the steel wreckage of tanks and flesh and blood on the ground silently told the story of the violent scene of the previous battle. "Ma'am, do you need him alive?" Luke dragged the defenseless Julian over to Stephanie. The latter shook her head. She brought back the relevant technology, but also found out the specific process of making those Aryan supermen. Moreover, Stephanie had seen a lot of live specimens for dissection in Berlin. Bringing Julian will only increase the risk. Who knew when the other party would regain his power? "That's fine." Luke smiled gently. Then, without hesitation, he snapped the German soldier's neck. After the short battle just now, he probably got the comprehensive data of a tank-level Aryan Superman. Strength, speed, defense, nerve reaction, self-healing ability, and so on. Generally speaking, they were stronger than super soldiers. Even Rogers, with the name of Captain I can do this all day, may get a headache while facing the tank class. It's hard to win unless you can hit a weak spot. However, these Aryan Supermen seem to have a massive defect. They can't fight too long. Luke was keenly aware that Julian's power and speed degenerated to the level of ordinary people after releasing the energy in his body as if the power was exhausted. This may be the reason why the Axis powers haven't launched a counter-offensive. Weren't Aryan Supermen suitable for long-term combat? A series of questions were temporarily kept in his mind. "To be honest, I'm looking forward to meeting the battleship class people." Luke changed his armor suit and looked down at the fallen German soldier. The strength of this tank class has yet to reach the point of changing the tides of war. Unless the Axis powers could mass-produce explosive soldiers, it was impossible to win by a single strategy. Stephanie's eyes flashed. Although she was curious about the Allied Superman's combat uniform, she didn't take the initiative to ask about it. This was probably the strategic science reserve's secret technology, and it may arouse resentment to inquire rashly. Brigadier General, battleship class, is better than tank class on several levels. Their resilience, physical quality, and energy attack effects are several times greater than the latter, the female agent that was spying in Berlin warned. After seeing Luke fight the tank class, Aryan Superman, she had a little more hope for the Allies' future. However, she was still not optimistic about defeating the Axis powers. There were hundreds of tank-class people in Berlin alone. They were led by 3 even more powerful battleship classes, which is enough to form an invincible fighting force. On the Allied side, there was only one Superman, one Luke. "Stephanie, the Prime Minister can't wait to see you. I can't wait to know the truth about these Aryan Supermen." Luke walked ahead. Someone will come later to clean up the battlefield. His mission is to bring Stephanie back safely. Other than that, it didn't matter. "Thank you, General Cavill." At the back, the female spy said faintly, "Thank you for calling me Stephanie. It's been a long time since anyone has called me that." "Do you want to continue the pursuit?" General Sankt. The next day, a group of heavily armed German soldiers crossed the dense forest and came to the Allied front line. The guards have already been evacuated, leaving only a messy battlefield. Call off the chase. There is no Freya anymore. She has recovered her former identity and returned to London. That damn bitch. General Sankt had his hands behind his back and a grave expression on his face. The wreckage of tanks, scattered limbs, and traces left by an energy explosion named distortion halos all told General Sankt that there had been a fierce battle here. Is the Superman of the Allies the one who could fight a tank class? He muttered to himself. It was clear that the Allies should have paid a heavy price to defeat the tank class Julian. So much for the Allies' Superman, far less exaggerated than the Allies make it out to be. General Sankt came to his conclusion. He looked closely at the scene. After a lot of hard work, he seemed to see that the Allied Superman and ordinary soldiers barely defeated Julian and won the final victory in the battle. General, we must assume that the core technology has fallen into the hands of the Allies and that the locations of other military factories have been exposed. We should take countermeasures as soon as possible. A blonde-haired female lieutenant spoke. Stephanie, who escaped, was once a core member of the Aryan Superman project. She knew too much, was deeply involved in the most critical projects, and had taken away some Worden's blood. This is undoubtedly the worst news. Transfer all the data and researchers about the superhuman technology to the second location and cleanse all the inferior test subjects. General Sankt said coldly. He wanted to speed things up and try to help the Third Reich gain a more significant advantage before the Allies made their Superman. I hope the Führer will listen to me and not be overwhelmed by a moment of victory. General Sankt was worried. He didn't have much hope for the mustached Führer in Berlin. After all, that man is known for being a master of micromanagement. His military standards were extremely average, but he always liked to tell those battle-hardened generals what to do. The series of defeats faced by the Third Reich, the Battle of Stalingrad, the Normandy landings, and the Ardennes counteroffensive, the Führer's will was everywhere. A mustached man whose ability to incite, leadership, and military command skills were inversely proportional. This is what General Sankt had to say about the Führer. Return to Berlin. We are so close to ruling the world. So close, the German general sighed. Underground base, London. A few days later in the Prime Minister's office. One of the Allied forces' heroes, Stephanie, changed into a long green dress, carried a briefcase and sat in a chair. Next to her is Brigadier General Cavill, who is sitting upright. This time is different, even those senior staff were excluded. There were only 3 people in the office. Good work, Stephanie. The Prime Minister poured a glass of wine and handed it to the female spy who had been lurking in the enemy's lair for years. You are MI6's finest, and I have heard of you for a long time. As it turns out, you did create a moment of relief for the Allies, saving us from the horrors created by those monsters in Berlin. Recently, I heard that many legislators were afraid to go out, only staying at home. They didn't even go to the Parliament Hall, because these cowards are afraid of Hitler, and his demons would suddenly fall from the sky, lift the roof, and hang them all from the street lamps, the Prime Minister said in a humorous and sarcastic tone, which eased the office's heavy atmosphere. No, Prime Minister. Stephanie took the glass, took a sip, and spoke with a smile. Those Aryan supermen who have been created at most, they could only move within the scope of the Third Reich for the time being. I participated in this project and knew their shortcomings. An Aryan superman couldn't fight too long. The weakness of the tank class is their eyes. There is also heavy firepower, such as rocket-propelled grenades and anti-tank weapons. The more battleship class ones fight, the more tired and weaker they get. According to the experimental report, the limit of the latter is almost 8 hours. Every time they start a full-force battle, they would have to take a period of rest to recover later on. So, for the moment, the Germans are holding their ground at best. But after they have accumulated enough troops, that would be the beginning of a disaster. Hearing Stephanie's answer, the Prime Minister didn't know whether to be happy or afraid. He turned his attention to Luke, who was sitting opposite him. He heard that the young Brigadier General had personally eliminated a tank-class Aryan Superman. This news excited the top leaders of the Allies and effectively dispelled the fear of the frontline soldiers. The defeat of the Soviet army has caused many people to become pessimistic. Luke's victory became a valuable source of publicity for the Allies. I haven't fought with a battleship class yet, so I don't know their strength. Luke guessed the Prime Minister's thoughts, trying to ask him to directly fuck over all the Aryan supermen, which was simply unrealistic. Hundreds of tank classes, plus 3 battleship classes of unknown strength, will probably drain himself dry. Besides, he didn't have an obligation to fight for the Allies. The brave and fearless super soldier is only a superficial persona, and it is not advisable to enter the character too profoundly. I'm sure Stephanie still has more critical information. Otherwise, the Germans wouldn't have to hunt her from Berlin. Luke threw the question to the female spy next to him. Yes, I can help the Allies and make superhumans, Stephanie said word for word. Once the heavy news was announced, the Prime Minister's office fell into a brief silence. Does that mean the Allies could have supermen too? A moment later, with a click, the cigar in the Prime Minister's hand fell on the table. I was placed in the Norwegian research group in 1941 when I was undercover as a biologist, Freya Bergen. Stephanie said in a soft voice. After Berlin recognized me as a Nazi supporter, they recruited me into the Aryan Superman project. There is no need to tell you the rest of the story. All in all, I managed to break into the core and get access to these. Stephanie opened the briefcase, and besides a document, there was a glass vessel containing many unusual red crystals. The color was very vivid, like crystal clear blood coral. Woden's blood. What a strange smell. Luke, who was sitting next to her, frowned slightly. He felt very unstable and dense energy from the irregular pile of red crystals. It was like a powder keg that would explode at any time, making people feel it was perilous. This is an intuitive response that came from the heart. This is. The Prime Minister looked at Stephanie and asked doubtfully. He thought he was going to see a stack of detailed lab reports or documentation. It's the only way for the Allies to defeat those monsters. Stephanie took another sip of wine. It seems that this female spy had been lurking in Berlin for a long time and got into the habit of drinking, but it is understandable. Every undercover agent lurking in the enemy's base camp was under tremendous psychological pressure. They live among enemies and pretend to be the other side, incorporating the false identity into their daily lives. It wasn't easy. The Germans call this stuff Woden's blood, which is necessary to transform ordinary people into super soldiers. Stephanie explained in detail while drinking. These red crystals are crystalline polymers that are gradually produced during a special fermentation process, so think of them as vegetables in a field. In other words, it takes time for Woden's blood to grow, and it wouldn't just come out of thin air. The good news is, before I left the factory, I blew up all the containers containing Woden's blood. It would take a lot of time for the Germans to rebuild another facility. But the bad news is that General Sankt, who is in charge of the Aryan Superman project, is a strict and careful man. So there will be surplus reserves to keep the damn project from going completely bankrupt. The Prime Minister took a puff of his cigar. He gazed at the red crystals in the glass vessel and asked, "So you know how to make synthetic Woden's blood?" I was responsible for screening the candidates. But the process of cultivating Woden's blood wasn't complicated, and with these red crystals, I believe that the Allied scientists will soon be able to research it. Stephanie shook her head and gave an answer that was neither surprising nor disappointing. And this document is. The Prime Minister shifted his gaze to something else in the briefcase. The origin of Woden's blood and the Aryan Superman transformation technology's origin is recorded here. Stephanie's expression was severe as she spread out the dense word-laden information. The original manuscripts were kept so secret that I couldn't access them. These are just copies I stole. Luke, who is sitting next to her, and the Prime Minister, who exhaled a mouthful of smoke, both pricked up their ears and listened carefully. Aryan Superman in Berlin appeared suddenly, and no one knew the specific origin. At one time, the Allied leaders thought that the Axis powers had successfully copied the serum developed by Abraham Erskine and made a more powerful version of super soldiers. According to Stephanie's intelligence, super soldier and Aryan Superman seem to be two completely different products. The former is a serum creation, while the latter is a new and unfamiliar secret technology. The Führer in Berlin was known to be obsessed with occultism and the pursuit of supernatural powers. Stephanie recalled and whispered, The Hydra organization was originally a branch of the Third Reichsarnenab Institute to establish an external intelligence agency. Later, Red Skull recruited a large number of scientists and absorbed many fanatics, gradually breaking away from the control of the Führer. Luke's eyes moved slightly. He had a vague guess about the origin of Worden's blood and the technology to make Aryan supermen. Could it be that it is related to the ancient Hydra? To curb Red Skull's growing ambition and his rapidly increasing strength, the Führer secretly set up a new research team to reproduce. A powerful super soldier like General Cavill threw the blood samples left behind by Red Skull. Stephanie glanced at Luke and had to say that she was pleasantly surprised by him. In the battle against the tank class, Aryan Superman, the young general showed overwhelming strength. A series of failures almost caused the Führer to abandon the project. However, news came from the Ahnenerbe Institute, which excavated an ancient document containing strange words analyzed and deciphered by professionals and classified as the language of an alien race in ancient times. Hearing this, the Prime Minister looked confused and took a puff of his cigar to calm down. As a graduate of the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst, a published author of several books and a future Nobel Prize winner in literature, and a famous orator who unveiled the Cold War's intro between the United States and the Soviet Union. The British Prime Minister did not know what to make because the head of the Axis powers was enjoying alien literature and creating the Aryan Superman in an attempt to conquer the world. Is the world too crazy, or am I just unable to keep up with the changes of time? The Prime Minister's elbow was on his desk, propping up his somewhat rounded face with a dull expression of overwhelming information was added. Aliens have visited Earth in times farther away from the birth of humans. Luke is very calm about this matter. After all, this is the Marvel Comics world. Within the 9 realms, besides the Earth called Midgard, there were Asgard and Jotunheim, where frost giants live, and so on. If we look further away, there will be more Skrulls, Kree, and Shi'ar, who together form the 3 civilized empires of the galaxy. As for the higher ones, there are the Council of Elders, Council of Godheads, and the 5 cosmic beings. Therefore, during World War II, the Axis powers discovered alien technology, which is very reasonable without the slightest problem. I know it sounds like a fantasy, or the ramblings of a madman, with no credibility. Stephanie saw the Prime Minister's expression and shrugged helplessly. I started with this attitude. I thought that all these lies were fabricated by the Germans, mainly used to deceive the ignorant people and make them worship the Führer like fanatics, until I deeply participated in the Aryan Superman project and found inside information. They did find the remains of an ancient civilization, which, according to research, may be from ancient Egypt. It details the heroic exploits of a priest named Imhotep, who led the Egyptian people to fight against the alien brood. The red crystals that could transform the human body and stimulate its potential were the technology left behind by the brood. Those bug-like aliens cultivate Worden's blood and use them as food to feed the beasts, catalyze them into terrible monsters, and use them as war machines. Prime Minister, who acted as an audience, was on the verge of a nervous breakdown and couldn't help but reach for the liquor bottle on the table. He poured himself a cup of gin and poured it into his mouth. As if that wasn't enough, he poured 2 more glasses in a row and drank them all in one gulp. Imhotep. I remember he was the pharaoh's chancellor in the 3rd Egyptian dynasty and the designer of the Pyramid of Djoser. Luke, who had specific knowledge of history, interjected in due course. He always thought the name was familiar, not only in textbooks. According to the paintings in the ruins and the literature, Imhotep was an outstanding leader, a brave and powerful fighter. With a spear and a shield, he led countless Egyptians to victory over the alien creatures, killing them and driving them off the earth, Stephanie replied solemnly. Holding a spear, holding a shield, the ancient Egyptian pharaoh. When he heard this, Luke had a flash of light in his head. He finally knew why he thought the name Imhotep was familiar. This ancient Egyptian was the most successful pharaoh of the 3rd dynasty and honored as the god of wisdom and medicine by later generations and was worshipped for all eternity. His true identity was a superhero in ancient times. Although he didn't have any super ability, he fought purely with physical combat, but his strength was outrageous. With a group of Egyptian natives holding spears and shields, they defeated the alien creatures whose biotechnology exceeded Earth by many years. He belonged to the ordinary people who fought with fierce mammoths and kicked saber-toothed tigers. They could be called the terrifying Homo erectus in real life. They were slamming alien forms to the ground with their own hands. Apocalypse, who later claimed to be the ancestor of mutants, was also a student of Imhotep, and they once fought side by side. At that time, Apocalypse, while cutting alien insects and cheering for the teacher, was still young and naive. That's so long ago, Luke secretly lamented. He didn't expect the biological transformation technology behind Aryan Superman made in Berlin to come from that ancient era. But when you think about it, you can't pick out any problems. After that, the secret organization, Brotherhood of the Shield, was established by various historical big shots, such as Leonardo da Vinci, Newton, Tesla, Galileo, etc. They adopted the eagle logo from the shield held by Imhotep. As for the later SHIELD, Hydra, and Leviathan, all three are actually of the exact origin, with more or less traces of the Brotherhood of the Shield, but each going in a different direction. Therefore, it was reasonable for the Third Reich, which inherited a part of Hydra's heritage, to get the biological transformation technology of brood alien bugs. In the beginning, the Germans didn't know that there was cutting-edge technology that could transform the human body hidden in that ancient document. The research on it was more out of academic curiosity. But when someone deciphered the contents of the first chapter, everything changed. Stephanie didn't know that Luke had speculated about the whole incident. She pushed up the gold-rimmed glasses on the bridge of her nose and continued. The Germans realized that they had found a treasure, found a key to open the door to a world of new humans. Then, General Sankt reported the news to the Führer in charge of all this. The whole Aryan Superman program began. 3 departments were established separately, according to the contents of the literature. The first is to make the catalyst for transforming the human body, that is, Worden's blood. The second one is responsible for screening candidates and finding catalyst-sensitive individuals. The third and largest department is responsible for transforming the human body and mass production of monsters. And this isn't the worst. General Sankt only translated the ancient literature by 1/5. It is to say, in addition to tank class and battleship class, there may be more powerful Aryan superhumans in the future. After Stephanie finished speaking, the Prime Minister went silent. More powerful Aryan superhumans. Carrier class. Luke was quietly wondering what level he was in the later stage of development. Nuclear class. Space warship class. Star Destroyer. Black hole class. As for the threat of the Aryan Superman, to be honest, he didn't pay much attention to it. Not too inflated or blindly confident. If one calms down a little and thinks with his head, he can guess that these low-quality, superhumans, which had been transformed with body modifications, must have some unknown defects. Otherwise, as early as the ancient Egyptian period, the brood would have ruled the world, so there was no need to wait for the Third Reich to inherit this technology. Stephanie, tell me, are those superhumans capable of growth? Why hasn't the Third Reich implemented mass production yet? The Prime Minister is a veteran politician with a deft hand, quickly identified several critical issues from the female spy's words. Right now, mass production is an impossible task. Studies have shown that Worden's blood, as a catalyst, will only work and start a transformation process on about 1 out of 5,000 subjects. Stephanie saw the Prime Minister who wanted to reach out and touch it and hasten to stop him. For others, it's a deadly contact poison. In the ancient literature, there's a method to identify the candidate, but the general couldn't decipher it. So he came up with another evil plan. First, test the catalyst on thousands of prisoners, Jews, and Soviet prisoners. Blood was then taken from the survivors for specialized testing. Next, the identified blood is used on a large scale to mark potential candidates' soldiers who are similar to the survivors and meet the requirements of Worden's blood, and recruit them into the team. In the end, as long as the soldiers are all classified as catalysts, one will always pass the hundreds of tank classes, and the 3 battleship classes all came from this. After listening, the Prime Minister couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Stephanie destroyed a production plant. Worden's blood needed to be cultivated, coupled with the low success rate of making an Aryan Superman. This series of reasons made it difficult for the Axis countries to complete the final plan of bombing troops across Europe quickly and won a little respite for the Allies. General Cavill, what do you think? The Prime Minister snuffed out the half-smoked cigar and looked at Luke with expectant eyes. Stephanie put the Allies and the Axis powers on the same starting line again and gave them the capital to participate in this game. But this didn't mean that the scales of victory are beginning to tip in favor of the Allies. The war that is sweeping the world had, in a sense, become a competition between cutting-edge warfare capabilities and consumption. Ordinary soldiers were reduced to cannon fodder. Even the tanks and bombers couldn't completely change the situation. Luke is the only Superman in the Allies' possession. Moreover, his combat power had exceeded the Third Reich's tank class. There is no doubt about the young general's strategic position or his ability. I think the most important thing at this stage is to convene the Strategic Science Reserve to study the composition of Worden's blood and cultivate it, and select qualified soldiers as recipients. Luke's thoughts were evident as he looked at the red crystals in a glass vessel and said in a deep voice, "We can use the red crystals Miss Stephanie brought back as a specimen and draw blood from the soldiers who have been drafted into the army. As long as the blood reacts with the red crystals, they can be selected as the candidates to try out the transformation program later on." Luke's idea made both the Prime Minister's and Stephanie's eyes shine. This isn't a complex problem. But just after listening to all this, finding an implementable solution from the massive amount of information quickly, this requires keen insight and quick response. I'll tell Allied Command to bring back the Strategic Science Reserve under your leadership as soon as possible. General Cavill, as the savior of the Allies, you couldn't be more suitable. The Prime Minister knew how to gain goodwill and win over people. He quietly puts Luke in the position of holding absolute power. The resources and status enjoyed by the Strategic Science Reserve to fight against the Axis powers are bound to be top of the line. Being able to sit in a leadership position is helpful for future development. It's my pleasure to contribute more to the Allied forces, Luke said with a sincere expression. My greatest wish is for world peace. Any ambitious person who tries to start a conflict is my enemy. Prime Minister chuckled twice, held Luke's right hand firmly, and spoke with emotion. It's fate. My greatest ambition in life is also world peace. I can see right away that Your Excellency is also a peaceful man with a heart for the world. Luke subtly curled his lips. The most famous Prime Minister of the British Empire was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Ironically, the Italian dictator Mussolini, who Luke himself caught, and the Führer of Berlin have been nominated for this award. That's why the judges constantly redefine the word peace. Berlin, Parliament building. The Führer, who used to live in the bunker, was finally able to move into the luxurious bedroom, fair and square. Those bombers buzzing around Berlin every day will no longer disturb their sleep and increase their inner fear. Siegfried, you are the hero of the Third Reich, the perfect Aryan and my most loyal guard. The Führer woke up from the big soft bed, dressed in a robe, opened the door and said so. Although there was no Eva, the gentle lover beside him, Siegfried standing outside the door, made him feel exceptionally safe. He didn't have to worry about his safety being threatened, and he didn't have to worry about the Allied troops attacking Berlin and pulling himself to the square to hang. The head of the Third Reich had a good night's sleep, but just over 10 hours ago, he ordered Siegfried to kill tens of thousands of captured Soviets to test how strong the Aryan Superman was. Those soldiers whose limbs were cut off by the vaporizing light, their wails, their cries, their blood and limbs, didn't give the Führer the slightest inner turmoil. As a mediocre painter who had no talent and was rejected by art schools, he even thought it was globally the most beautiful color. General Sankt isn't here yet. The Führer rang the service bell, and it didn't take long for the chef to bring the prepared food. He skillfully picked up the knife and fork and cut the veal on his plate. Although the cuisine of the Third Reich consists of pig's trotters, sausages, and various kinds of bread, he appreciates the French cooking more. Their food research is as skillful and proficient as raising the white flag and surrendering. The Führer commented. General Sankt is on his way back. He was previously busy chasing a renegade female scientist who was a British spy. Siegfried, who was tall and almost touched the ceiling chandelier, answered truthfully. How careless of him, and here I was going to reward him. The Führer put down his knife and fork and chewed the food in his mouth, showing a disappointed expression on his face. General Sankt could have been a hero of the Third Reich like you, but unfortunately he didn't seize the opportunity. Berlin currently has 3 battleship classes, excluding Siegfried, who is guarding at his side. The Führer hadn't met the remaining 2 yet. The Führer only knew that a woman called Sieglind maintains a city-wide alert in the air defense tower. The other one is called Siegmund, who is responsible for destroying guerrilla forces outside the city. The 2 of them had a fantastic record of scrapping dozens of Allied bombers in one fell swoop. I wonder if the cowards of the Allies would cry out in fear. The Führer was full of ambition, and he felt that God once again blessed him. Soon, the Third Reich will stop its downward spiral and become even stronger. When power is too easy to obtain, it will make a person's ambition expand boundlessly. Like Red Skull, who had mastered the Tesseract, the Führer was so excited that he subconsciously ignored the struggles of the Third Reich and even began to think about another attack on Stalingrad to take Moscow. He always resented the defeat suffered by the Germans in front of the Soviets. This time, the opportunity to prove their ability has come. General Sankt has arrived. When the phone rang at the bedroom's bedside, Siegfried picked up the receiver and answered the phone for a few seconds before relaying the news. He is already downstairs, waiting to meet you, Führer. Let General Sankt come up. Although he made a mistake, he also made contributions to the Third Reich and shed blood. I can't mistreat the hero. With a wave of his hand, Siegfried opened the door. Before long, General Sankt, with a cold face, appeared at the door. You look very depressed, General Sankt. I've heard all about it. Don't worry about being punished. It's not your duty. The security failed, and you've worked very hard to fix those problems, even though it didn't work. The Führer put his hands behind his back and stepped on the dark patterned carpet with his bare feet. If you ignore the ankle-length burgundy robe, he looked pretty imposing, like a victorious general. You are a hero. You brought my miracle weapon and saved the Third Reich, albeit a little late. The Führer took off his glasses, like lifting a seal. He glared at General Sankt, who had his back straight, slammed down the pencil in his hand, and shouted, You owe me a reasonable explanation, General. I have read your report and asked Siegfried. The Aryan Superman project has been completed for several months. It's been longer than that, almost a year, my Führer. General Sankt interrupted the Führer, who was about to go into a rant, and said calmly, I made the first Type I Aryan Superman 11 months ago, and the first Type 2 will be put into use in the near future, followed by the production of the tank class. The 3 battleship classes are the ones that appeared further down the line. The Führer, who was interrupted, put on the glasses and took them off again. After rereading the article, the seal was lifted again, but the rant went on. So, this year you never told me about this. I watched the Reich fall back, and Allied bombers torture my spirit. The Führer didn't understand what General Sankt did at all. He was so angry that he couldn't help but curse trash. I thought Red Skull would last a little longer, and at that time the Aryan Superman wasn't ready, and they couldn't change the pattern of war. General Sankt remained calm and explained in a steady voice. After World War I, many Germans thought tanks were just a novelty, and they didn't care. Some even laughed at Heinz Guderian and said, What war machine? It only carries flour. That's because they only saw a tank, not a group of tanks. Only people like Guderian could see the actual value of tanks. It also made your empire, Führer. I will give you an invincible super army and a huge victory that will revive the Germans, but only if the Aryan Supermen could join the battlefield in droves. If I told you the news in advance to tell you the truth, I'm afraid you would directly send them to die in vain, and that would just meaningless consumption. General Sankt's outspokenness added to the Führer's anger. He will not tolerate accusations, especially in such a humiliating tone. That's enough, General Sankt. The Aryan Superman project will no longer be in your charge. Please step down. Considering the outstanding contributions made by General Sankt over the years, the Führer endured it and waved his hand to let the other side step down. My Führer, why don't you want to face up to your mistakes? General Sankt, with his hands behind his back and his body motionless, shook his head and said, "You're like a madman who lost his mind, letting Siegfried kill tens of thousands of Soviet prisoners. You didn't even think that this would only arouse the resistance from the Allies. No one would surrender in the future. I'm the one who's disappointed in you. You were just an Austrian bumpkin who got into this seat because you were born in a country with Prussian rigidity and a bunch of idiots who were willing to listen to your nonsense. You had the most powerful war machine in the world, but you buried it in your bottomless pit of arrogance. Führer, I believe more strongly than you do in a great Third Reich. I also believe even more firmly that the Reich deserves a more gifted leader than you." General Sankt's remarks thoroughly angered the Führer. He picked up the pencil on the carpet and calmly said, "Oh, General, I didn't expect you to think of me this way, which is really regrettable. You won't be able to see the Third Reich in your imagination and the leaders who are more gifted than I am. Siegfried, kill him." With a command from the Führer, Siegfried, who was silent as a statue, came forward and stood in front of General Sankt. His eyes were blazing hot, and the terrifying energy was like wisps of blue light that pulsed incessantly. "Yes," Siegfried said so. Then he turned around and looked at the Führer himself. A dazzling light bursts out from both eyes. 3 days later, Colonel Phillips arrived at Bletchley Manor, just outside London, with the Howling Commandos and the Strategic Science Reserve. It used to be the Allies' Code Deciphering Center, specializing in deciphering intercepted German radio signals. At its peak, it had a staff of 6,000, including top mathematicians from Oxford University and Cambridge University. But what was best known was probably Alan Matheson Turing, who led the team to conquer the Enigma code. He was called the father of modern computer science by later generations, and was also the initiator of the Turing test. Luke, who met Turing not long ago, almost recognized him as Dr. Strange or Holmes. "I just heard that the Axis folks unearthed ancient civilizations' biotechnology. Did primitive people know science too?" Colonel Phillips came into the office and shouted at the top of his lungs. His voice resounded as he asked regarding the defeat of the Soviet army. There were also issues such as the Aryan supermen of the Axis powers. The external information of the Allied forces was that Berlin had summed up a set of inhuman and ruthless human body modification techniques from the lance of Longinus and the knowledge left over from an ancient civilization. This sounded, at least, much more convincing than a massive invasion by alien creatures on the earth and the final victory of an ancient Egyptian pharaoh. People during World War II hadn't experienced the information explosion of the Internet era, hadn't developed the tough nerves of the latter-day New Yorkers that weren't surprised by the various alien creatures and supervillains, yet. As for Worden's blood and the transformation plan for manufacturing an allied Superman, these were top-secret information and haven't been made public yet. In addition to the Allied leaders, only Luke, a participant, and Stephanie, who was in charge of directing the scientific research, knew about it. Maybe before we occupied the planet, there were earlier civilizations. For scientific questions, Colonel, you should go to Howard. He will give you a satisfactory answer. Luke is chatting with Stephanie and Rogers in his office. When he saw Colonel Phillips coming in, he got up and walked over. He had always maintained a respectful attitude towards his former commander. The colonel's rank isn't high, but he has a wide range of contacts and is familiar with the Army and Navy factions. Luke knew that there was probably a high level of discrimination in the U.S. military. Around the 18th century, the Army was at the top of the chain because they were all fighting locally. But with the increasingly prominent role of the Air Force during World War II, the former lesser brothers began to catch up. After that, the Navy rose to power and became the golden boy of Congress. In contrast, the Army and Air Force had become stepchildren, and their status was gradually slipping. Then they gradually formed the Army Department and the Navy Department, the Two Hills. Luke still remembered that Curtis Emerson LeMay, a 4-star general of the U.S. Air Force, known as the Eagle of the Cold War, said that the Soviet Union is our adversary. Our enemy is the Navy. This shows how serious the factional struggle is among the military. As the regular army, and often appeared in various movies, The National Guard is small and transparent, often overlooked, and had never been counted into the factions at all. After defeating Red Skull and Hydra, Luke met with many military leaders on the recommendation of Colonel Phillips. Dwight Eisenhower, George Patton, Douglas MacArthur, Chester Nimitz, George Marshall, and so on. These people are also happy to be on good terms with the Allies' favorite boy. A 20-year-old brigadier general has an unimaginable future as long as he didn't change to the wrong side or die on his own. Qualifications can be accumulated, contacts can be collected, and inside information can be gathered. But years can't be reversed, and time wouldn't come back. Therefore, for Luke, youth isn't only a disadvantage, but also capital that can be used. That Howard Stark guy. Called up to Oak Ridge to work on a classified project. Colonel Phillips shook his head and said, "Allied Command has handed over the command of the strategic science reserved to you. What kind of miracle are you going to lead us to this time, Luke? How about raiding Berlin and capturing the Führer alive?" "Wrong. The current leader of the Third Reich is General Sankt," Luke said half jokingly and half seriously. These days he and Rogers have discussed how to end this war in the fastest way possible. The answer was to storm Berlin. Now, the Allies cannot give the Third Reich any chance to breathe, and once they regain their deficit through the Aryan Supermen and enter the explosive soldier phase, it will be challenging to win quickly. "Do you think so?" Colonel Phillips frowned at the thought, not surprised, but began to consider the feasibility. He is used to the fantastic things that come out of Luke's mouth. This is the prepared plan. Luke cleared his throat and called Carter, Stephanie, and Rogers outside the door to his desk. A group of people gathered around a long wooden table made of red mahogany with an open map and a confidential document in front of them. A group of people gathered around a long wooden table made of red mahogany with an open map and a confidential document in front of them. After a lengthy and necessary introduction, Luke spoke with a deep voice. "Steve, aren't you always asking me what happened? I will now share this top-secret information with all of you. Berlin has produced Aryan supermen who are more powerful than super soldiers. Their technology comes from the cutting-edge technology of alien species. Thanks to Miss Stephanie, who brought back Worden's blood from Berlin and copies of the ancient documents, the Allies have the capital to fight against it now. After discussion, the Allies are also preparing to make supermen deal with the threat from the Third Reich. Both crystal cultivation and candidate screening are being carried out simultaneously. For a while, the office was tranquil, with only one person breathing. Luke's words were so informative that they took a minute to digest them. "So, the war isn't over yet," Rogers pursed his lips. "It seems that the plan to search for Bucky will be put on hold. Luke, is there anything I can do? Maybe I'm not as good as the tank class and battleship class you mentioned, but I won't back down as long as I can fight." As expected of Captain America, every word was on the mark, and even Colonel Phillips, who had never been much of an admirer of his, showed a hint of respect. Rogers has a passive skill, his leadership aura. Unaffected Luke, who has an immune effect, quietly thought so. "I can join the fight and the Howling Commandos. They'll be happy to come back under your wing." Colonel Phillips said so. He was still alive and well, could still carry a gun, and contribute toward the Allied forces. Luke glanced at it without showing any expression and felt that the colonel's old arms and legs might not be enough to go against tank-class Aryan supermen that showed everyone a ripping a living man apart show. "All of you, don't rush. This is not pre-war mobilization." The young brigadier general shook his head. The competition and confrontation between the Allied forces and the Third Reich have turned into a rivalry and slaying between the top fighting forces. Stephanie and I have seen those Aryan supermen with our own eyes. To be fair, they are powerful. They aren't an existence that ordinary soldiers can go against. Blind fervor will only make more people make unnecessary sacrifices. It's not worth it. Luke's reply made two soldiers, one old and one young, somewhat depressed. Rogers, in particular, always felt that he had done nothing in this war. The present situation is no different from before. In the previous Brooklyn trio, he was always the one who was protected. Today, too. But immediately afterward, Luke's conversation changed, and his eyes turned to Rogers with his head down. He asked seriously, "Steve, tell me, do you want to be stronger?" "Get stronger." Rogers paused and fell silent. As a super soldier, he has a muscular physique and fantastic endurance. It was a top-notch force on the battlefield that could raid the enemy's lair with 1 against and 100 and chop off the enemy's heads. In the future, after a long period of training, he could hold a helicopter with his bare hands and almost resist the Infinity Gauntlet. He would be able to lift Thor's hammer and the vibranium shield to form a legendary golden set in the future. He could arm wrestle with Thanos. A 50-50 split battle. Such a strong super soldier, ultimately a dominant player during World War II. How do I get stronger? It's just that reality is always cruel. It's just that friendly forces and enemies all have supermen, making Rogers a foil in the background. He should have become the strongest and bravest super soldier in everyone's eyes, without thinking about becoming stronger at all. With Luke on the Allied side and Aryan supermen on the Axis side. Captain America, who was destined to shine brilliantly and become a national icon, only accomplished the latter. The military didn't value him, and he had no chance to show his worth, just like a performer on stage, acting as a backdrop for another star. It's optional, but not significant. As a super soldier, Rogers couldn't remember how many times and how many people asked himself, "Why are you so different from Luke?" He could smash a tank, break into Hydra's base camp, and wasn't even afraid of energy weapons. But you can only throw your shield. Such questions never went away. Gradually, this became a problem that Rogers couldn't overcome. Later, just thinking about people putting him and Luke together, the highly motivated and energetic Captain America would become very self-conscious. Am I that bad? Rogers kept asking himself in his heart. He was initially a positive and persistent person who would never give up. However, the apparent disparity in front of the public and the criticism from public opinion that was heard from time to time still made Rogers feel pressured. He often pondered alone in the middle of the night. Was Dr. Erskine more optimistic about Luke, as everyone said, and he was just an unexpected bonus? Or Luke was injected with an enhanced version of the second-generation serum, while he was a first-generation product that wasn't as effective as the former. That's why he couldn't become a powerful super soldier like his best friend. All kinds of guesses and thoughts tormented the immature Captain America and made it difficult for him to sleep. Until now, Luke asked himself, "Do you want to be stronger?" "Yeah," Rogers nodded heavily, and his intense emotion condensed into a yes. Even when he was in Brooklyn and was bullied, he never yearned to be stronger so much as he did right now. Kryptonians are inherently strong. Rogers, you haven't understood this truth yet. It occurred to Luke that the cost of breeding Worden's blood wasn't low and could even be considered expensive. Perhaps this was one of the reasons why Berlin hasn't successfully mass-produced Aryan supermen. In addition to technical constraints, the success rate was also low, and there were cost problems. Then you can become a candidate for the Allied Supermen program. Luke collected his thoughts, coughed, and earnestly said, "But I want to remind you, Rogers, this isn't a serum injection that you can survive with a strong will and a firm mind alone. Receiving Worden's blood is a difficult process. Its success rate is shallow, and you have to survive multiple mutations. The third variation is tank class, and the 24th variation is battleship class." And Miss Stephanie also said that the Worden's blood transformation procedure might cause great damage to the human body and shorten the life cycle. You should think about it. Luke solemnly reminded him, turning into a Superman wasn't easy. He has no idea what direction fate would take Captain America to. Anyway, Rogers, who hasn't been frozen for 70 years, has been given a brand new life. The next step is to prepare for the unknown. I have thought it over. Rogers has a fearless and resolute expression on his face. Anyway, he will always look like this. Once he had set a goal, he would rush forward and never turn back. Well then, let's move on to the next question. Luke nodded and didn't say anything else. The secret meeting of the Strategic Science Reserve lasted for 2 hours. It should have ended 50 minutes ago, but Colonel Phillips said he wanted to make a few brief remarks. Then the conversation continued to expand, and the content kept growing. It wasn't until Luke tactfully reminded that it was getting late that the colonel stopped talking, and everyone else was relieved. "Steve, you stay." When everyone walked out of the office, Luke called out to an excited-looking Rogers. "I want to have a good talk with you." "Well, let's start with the blonde girl at the party. Her name was Marjorie, right? How are you two doing?" Have you been in touch recently? Luke leaned back and asked in a relaxed tone. Yeah, everyone thought that the war was coming to an end. She was a Scottish girl, so she returned to Edinburgh early. We sometimes write letters to each other. Rogers pulled out his chair and sat down. He scratched his head and said, But you know, Luke, I'm not very good at talking, and I can't write any funny jokes. So I'm frustrated. Captain America, who fell in love for the first time, was no different from ordinary people. No, to be honest, he might be worse than a lot of people. After all, Luke really couldn't imagine the always serious Rogers smoothly spit out loving words. You don't have to show your humor. You're not Howard. You can talk about the little things that happen in life and let the lucky girl feel that you care. Luke smiled and then seriously said, Steve, we're friends. So I don't want my existence to put pressure on you. I know speculations and rumors circulating in the military about super soldiers, me and you. They said some ugly things. But I told you a long time ago. Dr. Erskine was more optimistic about you. It wasn't like all those people said. You weren't just a side bonus. Steve, there are some qualities in you that I don't have and don't possess. Frankly speaking, I'm not a good person in the true sense of the word. I do everything with my own considerations, either in terms of interests or personal interests. I never give meaningless pity to the enemy, nor do I give ignorant sympathy to the weak. Therefore, I lack the qualities to be a hero. I'm not interested in being one. In comparison, I'm a little more similar to Howard. We are both passionate about leading people, standing taller, and being the decision-maker who gives the orders. Luke stared at Rogers deeply. He didn't hide his nature, just like he didn't hide his ability in Camp Lehi. If we say that the future of this world is destined to be an era of superheroes, then he prefers to be a protector, a controller, and a receiver. Instead of wearing the armor and red cloak, busy every day getting the kitten down from the tree and back to its owner, save a plane from crashing, or save a ship from sinking. Generally speaking, Luke had no intention of taking on the superhero career. Didn't want to see Captain America because he wanted to catch up to him, venture into the Allied Superman program. After hearing all this, Rogers restrained his smile and turned silent. After a long while, he spoke in a hoarse voice. I have to admit, you've been putting a lot of pressure on me, Luke. Although we're friends, I still envy you sometimes. What I long for isn't the glory you get or the adoring eyes of others, but the ability to always be the first to rush in when others need you. When I was in Brooklyn, Bucky was always surrounded by gangsters, and I couldn't help him. I dragged him down. After knowing you, it's different. You've always had a way of dealing with problems, street thugs, bootleggers, and gangsters. As time goes by, Bucky and I were used to looking for you whenever there was a problem. I did have the idea of catching up with you, Luke. However, this idea soon disappeared because no matter how good or powerful you are, you will always be my friend. Who would be jealous of their friend's achievements? A smile appeared at the corner of Roger's mouth as he looked at Luke with a calm face and sincerely said, I want to be strong, just to have the power to help. At least when you need me, I could stand up, so you wouldn't have to fight alone. There was a brief silence in the office. After a while, a hearty laugh came out. A week later, the first recipients of Worden's blood were ready to receive the treatment. Total of 321 people whose blood reacted with the red crystals were eligible candidates for the Allied Superman program. Now, they were settled in a camp outside of London, waiting for a preliminary test. It must be said that when the government apparatus is in motion, everything is done efficiently. From screening suitable candidates to picking out qualified recipients, the speed was impressive. Brigadier General Cavill, the next step is the transformation process. However, I still recommend that you and the top brass of the Allies don't get your hopes up. Luke and Stephanie walk along the tree-lined path in Bletchley Manor. Not long ago, news came from the Allies that General Sankt, who was in charge of the Aryan Superman project, had somehow revolted. The backstabbing bastard took out the ambitious Führer, who was about to make a big show of his ambitions. Sudden changes led to temporary chaos in Berlin. The subsequent change of power and the cleansing of forces even delayed the Third Reich's advance. General Sankt, who created an Aryan Superman with great difficulty, couldn't expand the advantage any time soon. The Allies were naturally happy with this situation. They wanted to buy more time, and it was better to wait until the Allied Superman army's mass production. Therefore, the two camps maintain a delicate balance. It can also be interpreted as being in the cool-down period, filled with the efforts to expand the army and the soldiers. To make a tank-class soldier, it will take at least half a month's transformation time and several weeks of high-intensity training before they can formally serve and set foot on the battlefield. Stephanie explained. Worden's blood is not like a serum. After receiving the injection, you can become a super soldier and become even more powerful. It has a transformation process. There will be some drastic changes from the skin on the surface to the muscle fibers and cells inside. Luke nodded to show his understanding. He was different from the Allied leaders who urgently wanted to see results. As the saying goes, haste makes waste. After years of research in Berlin, 3 battleship classes were created. How much faster can the Allies go? I approached Dr. Arnim Zola about the cultivation of Worden's blood and research work. He used to be the chief scientist of Hydra, designed powerful energy weapons, and has some experience in biology. As the Strategic Science Reserve leader, Luke has a lot of power and can mobilize a lot of resources. Recruiting Dr. Zola, who is being held up, was a piece of cake. You don't trust us? Stephanie picked her eyebrows. Luke has put a lot of people in the Allied Superman project these days. For example, Steve Rogers, one of the first recipients. And responsible for deciphering ancient documents, Peggy Carter, although the other party is British, she seems to be more inclined to the American side. Now, there's another Dr. Zola. This is the reward for rescuing you, Miss Stephanie. The Prime Minister promised to share the transformation technology of Worden's blood and related information with the Strategic Science Reserve. Luke looked calm. He isn't a voluntary worker who does good deeds without asking for anything in return. Well, I'm just a researcher anyway, so I don't care about that. Stephanie shook her head and stopped talking about it. She didn't pay much attention to national interests. Winning against the Axis powers and ending the World War is what Stephanie cares about. General Cavill, your friend, Steve Rogers, chose to join the Allied Superman program. The female spy blinked, showed her charming smile, and tried to say, he's a super soldier, and he is different from the others. According to my experience, Rogers may have a chance to survive 24 mutations and become a battleship class. Don't you feel anything? General, with your power, if you participate in the transformation program, you will only become stronger. Maybe you could surpass a battleship class and become an even mightier being. Luke shook his head and refused Stephanie's tempting suggestion. He coolly said, I don't need to be a Superman because I already am one. Even if he wanted to use Worden's blood to improve himself, he had to wait until Dr. Zola conducted a study and confirmed no problems. In this world of superheroes, the poor rely on mutations, the rich rely on technology. But Luke, he relied on his cards. 2 days later, at a camp outside of London, Rogers was wearing only a pair of shorts, sitting on a high-back chair with his upper body bare. His hands and feet were tied tightly, limiting his mobility. This is going to hurt, Captain Rogers. And this is your first time. Considering the consequences of failure, you can choose to give up. Stephanie, who wore a white coat, pushed the gold-rimmed glasses on the bridge of her nose. I can take it. Go on. Rogers took a few deep breaths to show that he was ready. The ambiguous conversation between the two made the atmosphere a little strange. It's like they were about to play some kind of adult game that's unsuitable for children. Steve, don't let me down. I'm still waiting to fight alongside you in the raid on Berlin. Luke automatically ignored the ambiguous conversation in front of him and stood by to cheer. I'll try my best. If it doesn't work out, Luke, you have to remember to take care of Marjorie for me and tell her not to be too sad and find a better man. Rogers may be worried that he might not survive and prepare his last words in advance. I have thought it over. When the war is over, I'll go back to Brooklyn. Shut up. I didn't hear anything. You better do those things yourself. Luke quickly interrupted the crazy Captain America, who was setting up his death flags. Such lines as I'll go home and get married after this battle. I'll finish this last job and then I'll quit. My child is about to be born. And so on. Basically, if they say them, you could be sure that this person was fucked. Even though Captain America should be the son of destiny in this period, who knew if Luke's arrival caused a butterfly effect. In case Rogers was gone, he was worried that the Sorcerer Supreme, who is far away in Carmitage, would draw a circle and come to talk to him themselves. All right, you're heartless, Luke. Rogers bitterly said he was still perplexed. Gentlemen, have you finished? I'm going to start. Stephanie, who was watching quietly, put on a pair of rubber gloves and took a capsule of Worden's blood out of the glassware. Good luck, Captain Rogers. At the end of her sentence, she placed the red crystal pellet called Worden's blood on Captain America's forehead. It was like hot iron, burning Rogers' skin. The sizzling sound of something scorching was endless. There was even a wisp of smoke floating away. The sound of pain poured out of his mouth in an uncontrollable stream. The Worden's blood, branded on his forehead, slowly melted and seeped into his body. He felt his skin, his cells, heat up as if it was enveloped in molten lava. A fantastic amount of heat emanated from his body. General Cavill, you have to control him. Seeing that Rogers was about to break free, Stephanie couldn't help but shift her gaze to Luke. This wasn't enough protection to subdue a super soldier. Steve, just bear with me. If you can't fight this pain, you might as well relish it. Luke reassures Rogers as he walks over to the other side. He reached out with both hands and pressed the muscular body, whose muscles were spasming as if it was being subjected to electric shock therapy, into the high-backed chair. Fortunately, this chair was reinforced, thickened, and made of metal. Otherwise, it may not be able to bear Rogers' violent struggle. This is only the first mutation. Stephanie sighed. When she was in Berlin, she had seen someone bite his tongue, hit his head against the wall, and even asked researchers to kill himself because he couldn't stand the terrible pain. It was beyond human endurance. I believe Steve will survive. Luke's hands were strong, holding Rogers firmly in the chair. Those alien creatures called Brood aim to create war machines, not to take away lives. The transformation success rate of Worden's blood is meager indeed. However, Captain America is a lucky man who had survived the serum injection without the slightest side effects. Compared to Red Skull's appearance, and then think of the little man from Brooklyn who turned into America's ass. It can only be said that the gap between people was sometimes more prominent than between people and dogs. I hope so. Stephanie was non-committal. She thought Rogers had the potential of a battleship class. It just depended on whether the other party could handle the pain of transformation. By the time Rogers survived the first mutation, it was already evening. Luke lifted the tent curtain and walked in with a bowl of oatmeal with a lot of glucose. Are you awake? The transformation was very successful. Rogers opened his eyes and regained consciousness. These were the first words he heard. He struggled to get up and leave the thick, reinforced high-back chair. While rubbing his wrist that had marks from the straps, he moved his stiff limbs. Are you sure it worked? I don't feel the slightest change. Rogers, wearing only one pair of underpants, was very puzzled. When he received the serum injection, he changed from being a little man directly into a big, muscular man. It can be said that significant changes have taken place from the inside out, which could be seen at a glance. However, the process of the first mutation, which had been very painful, didn't seem to have any significant effect on him. Stephanie said that if you're still alive, it means that the transformation is successful. Luke shrugged his shoulders and handed the bowl of porridge to Rogers. With some gloating, he says, your food for the next few days, in addition to the nutrient solution, some glucose. Enjoy this period of time. What about you? Rogers sipped the not-so-great-tasting oatmeal with a spoon and looked over at Luke, who was standing to the side. The latter smacked his lips and said, cheesesteak and grilled chicken. I declined Stephanie's invitation for English food and chose a pretty good restaurant to have dinner with Carter. He wasn't a vegetarian, so he wasn't interested in thick oatmeal that tasted bland and was laced with glucose. Can't I eat meat? Captain America made a severe request. How can I make up for my daily consumption by only eating this? Luke shook his head and explained, you will also be given a few bags of nutrient solution later. In about 3 hours, you have to undergo another mutation. She's afraid you'll throw up all the food in your stomach. If you want to try something else, I recommend the famous British dish, Stargazy pie, see that, and you'll think of glucose oatmeal as a delicacy. Hearing Luke's words, Dead Fish's eyes immediately appeared in Roger's mind. He quickly shook his head and refused this seemingly kind offer. That thing, was it really for human consumption and not some kind of scary artistic masterpiece? Rogers drank the bowl of oatmeal in a few mouthfuls and asked, can I take a bath? The intense pain of the initial mutation caused him to sweat so much that it was almost condensing into salt grains. This should be fine, Stephanie just said. No strenuous exercise and overeating food. Luke smiled. This feeling of treating Captain America as a guinea pig seemed quite interesting. The truth is, you're no different from normal. The transformation from Worden's blood can only be seen after at least 3 mutations. Rogers seems to understand. He, like Luke, wasn't much of an academic. The former didn't have talent in learning, while the latter didn't like using his brain more than his strength. That was more like Superman. Luke thought silently. By the way, how's the transformation of the others going? Rogers, who had run outside the tent to take a shower, asked aloud. Because Stephanie thought that he had the potential of a battleship class, he also had his own tent, so he didn't mix in with the other soldiers. The first mutation eliminated 141 people. Luke gave a specific number and sighed. Nearly half of them showed rejection and died. The remaining half couldn't bear the pain and started to hurt themselves. In short, not optimistic. This result shattered the idea that Worden's blood was an essential technology by the Allies' top management and could be promoted vigorously. The shallow success rate, coupled with the cost of cultivating the red crystals, was a bit uneconomical. You know, tank-class soldiers are still no match for a bazooka rocket launcher or a sniper's accurate shot. The only way to reap the rewards is to create battleship-class soldiers. This was equivalent to 10 consecutive draws, and the blue sky and white clouds were losses. Only when the purple flashes and the golden light appeared could it be counted as gaining back the capital. Those tank class can't satisfy the military, but battleship class can. But the latter's turnout rate is ridiculously low, enough to make any European emperor feel despair. Next, there are 2 more mutations. If you succeed, you will hopefully become a tank-class soldier. Luke sat in the tent. He estimated that it would be lucky to have 20 subjects who survived after 3 mutations, but considering they were all a bunch of blue-eyed blondes, it was possible to have a miracle. As for Rogers, if he succeeded in surviving 24 mutations, it would be a rare card shining with golden light. So, Rogers, go for it. Luke said he wasn't the one who had to endure the pain anyway. Dr. Zola had already been assigned to the Worden's blood research team, and even if he were to be rehabilitated, it would be afterward. 3 hours later, Rogers accepted the second mutation. This time, Stephanie adjusted the dosage of Worden's blood and nearly killed Captain America with a double dose. Luke gazed at Rogers, whose skin was red and veins were flaring. He couldn't help but secretly sigh. The poor rely on mutation, the rich rely on technology. After thinking about it, it was more reliable to bring your own plug-in. He took advantage of this time to think. He summarized the various heroes of the Marvel world and found that the Superman from the studio next door had it the easiest. He didn't have to do anything else. He just needed to sunbathe enough times. If he encountered intellectual problems, just throw it to Batman. If he encountered something that needed slashing, give it to Wonder Woman. If he encountered something that needed a sacrifice, send in the Flash. Indeed, as expected, being a leader is the easiest thing to do. Luke thought half-jokingly. The second mutation lasted for over 2 hours. When the transformation process was over, Rogers leaned against the high-back chair as if he was just fished out of water. His 2 big chest muscles kept fluctuating, looking like peaks on the side of the ridge, quite the feast for the eyes. "Are you okay?" Luke, who didn't go to bed and stayed up all night, asked. For him, the rest brought by sleep is optional. If he liked, he could stay awake for weeks. The thought of 22 more mutations makes me want to bang my head against the wall. Rogers has a breathless, lifeless look on his face. The medical field classified pain into many levels, the lowest being the mosquito bite, which is virtually unnoticeable. It is said that the highest level resembled giving birth. It was simply unbearable. For Captain America, the pain he endured was probably even more significant. Even if we don't strictly put the transformation process together with giving birth, just thinking about doing it 24 times made people's scalps tingle. "I think I'm going to collapse." Rogers looked to Luke and hoarsely said, "How many people were left this time?" 82 people. Luke brought another bowl of glucose oatmeal. With pity in his eyes, he said, "Here's your breakfast." Outside the tent, the sky was looking grey. At the end of one night, only 82 people survived the transformation from Worden's blood. These were still eligible subjects. The difficulty of mass production is enormous. Luke shook his head. If you think about it, Berlin developed 3 battleship class, rare cards all at once, all of the European descent. He wondered if the Allies could produce other battleship classes besides Rogers. Also of European descent, no reason to be too unlucky. Brigadier General Cavill, there's bad news. Just as Luke's thoughts were fluctuating, Stephanie, dressed in a white coat, hurried in. Berlin launched an attack. All 3 battleship class came out 2 days ago. Underground Research Institute, War Room, Berlin. General Sankt stared at the map hanging on the wall with his hands behind his back, and his brows were tightly wrinkled. After Siegfried got rid of the arrogant and blind Führer, he became the new leader of the Third Reich. Although the process wasn't smooth, there were also many opponents. After all, the Austrian mustache had no other advantages besides being good at brainwashing, with many die-hard fans. A bunch of idiots who can't think and just follow blindly. They can't see the future of the Empire, General Sankt sneered. Fortunately, I have you on my side, Guderian, so I'm not alone. He turned around and looked at the serious man fiddling with the military sandbox. The other party's name is Heinz Wilhelm Guderian, nicknamed Imperial Eagle. He is an outstanding general who was able to compete with Manstein and Rommel. This man helped General Sankt stabilize the situation and kept the vast empire from falling apart. I warned him that it would be foolish to use armored troops to attack the vigorously defended Kursk, Guderian said with an expressionless face. But the Führer always liked to act according to his own ideas. He doesn't have any strategic vision and doesn't understand military command at all. His talent in this field was even worse than art and painting. General Sankt nodded deeply. He and Guderian naively once thought that the Führer could lead the Third Reich in a better direction. Unfortunately, it turned out that Austrian bumpkins couldn't do it. We all want to build a more robust and better empire. Now, here's the chance. General Sankt said eagerly. He regarded Guderian as an ally, and it was common knowledge that the German general was at odds with the Führer. The other side had openly disobeyed the orders of the supreme leader of the Third Reich, refusing to shoot Soviet prisoners of war. It was unwilling to be the executioner in killing civilians. Even in the Battle of Moscow, he insisted on retreating despite the instructions from Berlin to save the strength of his army and the lives of his soldiers. This led to the Führer's outrage and the direct removal of Guderian into the reserve. But the irony was that after the defeat in Stalingrad, the egotistical Führer had to reinstate the other party. The Third Reich couldn't live without Guderian, and no one could replace him. This was the consensus reached by many people. After all, after Manstein's dismissal and Rommel's suicide by poison, there was no better choice. So, what do you think, Guderian? What should we do next? General Sankt humbly asks. Although he also graduated from the military academy, they are far less than the serious man in front of him in terms of strategic vision and command ability. The Empire is in shambles, and it's hard for us to recover from the disadvantage. But fortunately, you've created 3 battleship-class Aryan supermen. Guderian thought seriously and whispered, so far, they are invincible weapons. Therefore, I suggest launching 3 attacks with 3 battleship classes as the core. We can form 3 battle groups led by Sieglind, Siegmund, and Siegfried, respectively. General Sankt listened carefully. He has long wanted to expand the strategic advantage for the Third Reich. It was only held back by the old-school supporters of Führers, allowing the Allies to develop. Sieglind was sent to the northwest to launch a raid along the coast toward Belgium. As you know, the Ruhr pocket area was broken recently. Many German soldiers were being held in nearby concentration camps, and their release would allow them to continue to push for the destruction of Western Allied supplies in Belgium. Guderian gestured over the map and wisely said, send Siegmund to the east again, so as not to give the Soviets any chance to regain their strength. They are tenacious enemies and significant worries of the Empire. Simultaneously, Siegfried will be able to strike precisely at the oil fields of Ploesti in Romania, accurately, and recover some industrial core areas and the most crucial fuel storage areas. This way, the Empire will stabilize from the brink of collapse and the Western allies will be unable to launch a counterattack for a while. As long as we have a chance to catch our breath, we will be able to work our way out of the mess. General Sankt attached great importance to Guderian's opinion. He asked the other party to work out an operational policy carefully and then ended the conversation. "Baron, what do you think?" When Guderian left the war room, General Sankt faced a compartment and asked out loud. A grim man wearing a monocle slowly appeared. "Guderian's idea is a good one, but he missed one point." As an observer, the grim, bald man, with a sarcastic smile at the corner of his mouth, whispered, "The Allied powers have also obtained Woden's blood, and it won't be long before they master the biotechnology of making Aryan supermen. The one who can't afford to delay is the Empire. The only way to survive is to strike first, to destroy the enemy, to snuff out the threat in the cradle, then we could get a glimmer of hope." General Sankt was silent and didn't immediately state his position. He was only a scientist and had no experience as an imperial leader. Even if the 3 battleship class Aryan supermen do as they were told. However, it was still challenging to control a country employing power and force ultimately. Those old-school troops, loyal supporters of the Führer and party members, wouldn't tolerate a guy who hid in the laboratory and rarely set foot on the battlefield to sit in the leader position. Not to mention, political struggles and making bad checks weren't General Sankt's strong points. Therefore, to stabilize the situation, he first contacted Guderian and regarded the well-known German general as the first ally to win over. But this wasn't enough. It will take a political force to get involved to calm Berlin down completely. Therefore, General Sankt thought of Hydra. With the defeat of Red Skull and the fall of the headquarters, this huge organization should have collapsed. But things often turn out differently than most people expect. Red Skull's forces were wiped out, and other factions took over most of the resources, leaving nothing more than an empty shell for the Strategic Science Reserve. Far from weakening, this vital organization was growing bigger and bigger. "General Sankt, I must remind you." The grim man pulled out a chair and sat down, raised his legs, and said, "We helped you clear the obstacles and threw all those who had opposing views into prison. Guderian couldn't convince the old-school diehards, and he couldn't get the army to do your bidding. All this is due to the work of Hydra. General, how much of Woden's blood do you have left? I remember that the female spy named Stephanie blew up a production plant before she escaped, and many of your researchers were killed or injured. The deciphering of the ancient documents had come to a standstill. You don't have much time." Had it not been for Hydra, the Third Reich would have been dismantled by the Allies sooner or later. Every word from the vicious man was like a sharp needle stabbing deep into General Sankt's heart. He still kept his cold expression, but his attitude wasn't as stiff as before. He slowed down his tone and said, "So, Baron Strucker, please tell me what's the price." "Let Hydra's flag be spread all over the Third Reich," the man smiled, "and make an Aryan Superman for us. If you do that, you'll be an ally of Hydra, and will keep the seat of power under your ass." A vigilance flashed in General Sankt's eyes. The technology associated with Woden's blood is his only bargaining chip. In any case, he can't hand it over quickly. "Don't worry, General. I have no intention of coveting brood technology. I just want a Superman." The man clapped his hands, and a tall man in a mask came out of the compartment. "This is my latest work." He has a strong will, a strong physique, and more importantly, he is incredibly loyal to the Empire and Hydra. The tall man's eyes were hollow, and when he saw the grim man giving the command, he immediately raised his arms and shouted, "Hail, Hydra! You see, such an obedient weapon." Baron Strucker smiled with satisfaction when he saw the tall man looking like a tame, domesticated animal. This was the test subject that he found with difficulty. After Hydra's unique brainwashing technology, he trained it to be a killing machine without feelings. Baron Strucker also prepared a secret weapon for the tall man, together with Aryan Superman's enhanced transformation. He is sure to have the most powerful super soldier. General Sankt glanced back, quickly withdrew his eyes, and grunted coldly. It's not that easy to survive the Woden's blood mutation process. Being able to create 3 battleship classes was already an unexpected surprise. There was no exact standard to be a qualified subject for Woden's blood. Men and women, strong and thin, blonde hair, black hair. These weren't necessarily. there were too many unknown factors. You don't have to worry about that. Back to the topic, I think Udirian's plan is excellent, but he lacks some necessary knowledge about this war. Baron Strucker's eyes looked sharp. His tone became serious, and he whispered, "The threat to the Empire is not the Allies, but Superman, who conquered Italy, defeated Red Skull, and made the situation even worse. General, he is the menace that we need to get rid of urgently. The Allied Superman." General Sank's relaxed eyebrows immediately tightened. He thought Baron Strucker was exaggerating. Was one man enough to threaten the Third Reich? It sounded unbelievable. "I have 3 battleship classes." With his head held high, General Sankt was interrupted by a grim-looking Baron Strucker before he could finish his sentence. "Trust Hydra's judgment," the Baron said with patience. He felt that General Sankt at this moment was no different from the Führer who was shot in the head. They are always thinking lightly of people or things they don't understand. "General, let's move forward a bit. When was the Axis at a distinct disadvantage? Was it the defeat in North Africa, the landing of more than 2 million Allied troops in Normandy? Or was it the disastrous defeat on the Eastern Front? General, let's move forward a bit. When was the Axis at a distinct disadvantage? Was it the defeat in North Africa, the landing of more than 2 million Allied troops in Normandy? Or was it the disastrous defeat on the Eastern Front?" Baron Strucker narrowed his eyes. After receiving some resources from Hydra, he specially launched intelligence forces and reviewed the whole World War II situation. The leader of Hydra was a descendant of Junker nobility, a unique product of Prussia. Junker means young nobleman or young lord in German. Initially, it referred to the sons of the nobility without the title of knight, but later it referred to the Prussian nobility and the land in general. Unlike the traditional class, the Junkers have made military service the highest calling and an honorable tradition for the men in their family. The eldest son's inheritance system, that is, the title and land were all inherited by the eldest son. To gain the title under military service, other children could only work hard, actively exercise various military skills, and strive to establish military service. The existence of the Junker aristocracy had something to do with Germany's ability to launch the Second World War 20 years after the end of the First World War. They are all well-educated young elites with advanced military qualities and martial blood flowing through their veins. At the peak of the war, there was 1 soldier for every adult Germans. Compared with the military powers in the same period, there were 70 in France, more than 80 in Britain, and 130 in Russia, called the Battle Nation. It can be seen that Germany provoked the World War twice in a row and coveted the mighty throne of the European overlord. Wasn't blind arrogance without any reason. But Strucker, a Junker nobleman, joined the SS on his own initiative and became a close friend of the Führer. Most Prussian officers weren't considered staunch supporters of the Führer. They despised the secret police and the Gestapo. They thought them to be degrading to the military and lapdogs of the powerful. But Strucker didn't give a damn about the honor of a soldier or the code of nobility. He worshipped power and agreed with the extreme theory of Aryans were the perfect race. Therefore, he actively threw himself into the arms of the Third Reich and became the leader of Hydra. Let me tell you how the Third Reich collapsed, General. Even though the Allied attack was fierce, with Red Skull's energy weapons and the Valkyrie missiles, things were frankly far from being the worst. Baron Strucker, who had a professional military education, touched his own shiny, bald head and spoke with a grave face. The first domino fell at the fall of Rome. The Italians are indeed foolish allies. They only held us back, but they were still somewhat useful. As a result, the failure of Italy made the Allied Superman story a legend. It resounded all over the world, inspired the frontline soldiers of the Allied forces, and made more and more people see the light of victory. The second piece was the base in Klausenburg. The first time Hydra suffered such a defeat, even Red Skull had to flee in disarray and leaked the Valkyrie project. You know, before this, when the Allied forces faced our giant tanks and energy weapons, they simply couldn't lift the will to fight. Luke Cavill changed all this. The total defeat of Red Skull and the destruction of Hydra's headquarters proved that the Allied Superman was strong enough to influence the course of the war. The Third Reich always thought that the Allies were exaggerating the facts and over-promoting, making the soldiers at the front lines charge even more bravely. But this isn't the case. General, think back carefully. You sent Julian, that was a tank class, to track down the female defector spy, who saved her and made you lose a loyal soldier. General Sankt was deep in thought. He still had some difficulty in believing that the Allied supermen could threaten the Third Reich. He's like an inventor of a new weapon who thinks that his product is the best and unbeatable. So does General Sankt, who is steadfast in his belief that the Aryan supermen possesses a power that no creature can resist right now. This ironclad truth had been tested by hundreds of thousands of defeated Soviet troops. Rifles, artillery, tanks, bombers. Human-made conventional weapons can't hurt the battleship class. Even if there were powerful weaponry, such as naval cannons, it doesn't ensure an accurate hit. Unless a new weapon with comprehensive coverage and fast shock-wave diffusion is born, the battleship class could be taken literally. They're all humanoid battleships that could move quickly, have high maneuverability, and know how to think for themselves and judge the situation. Baron, even if everything is as you said, the young brigadier general of the Allied forces is the greatest threat to the Empire, but he's only one person. After a long silence, General Sankt silently raised Luke's danger level by 2 notches. However, he still wasn't convinced by Baron Strucker and still had complete confidence in the 3 battleship classes. That's the key. The Allies only have 1 Superman, and we have 3, and hundreds of tank classes. Baron Strucker slapped the palm of his hand and excitedly said, "So, we have a chance to wipe away this threat in advance." "You mean," General Sankt reacted with a frown, "design a trap to ambush the Allied Superman?" "That's right. Try to kill Luke Cavill before the Allies make another Superman, and then put the 3 battleship class in London and raid the Allied headquarters. The Allied Superman could do it, so can we. Capture London, raid New York, and send the opponents and resistors to hell." Baron Strucker was excited and seemed to have seen the prospect of victory. He shouted, "At that time, no one could stop the Empire." But Guderian said that the battleship class is an important strategic weapon, and we cannot afford any loss. General Sankt was hesitant. In the end, he isn't a politician or a military leader and usually stays in the laboratory, buried in all kinds of boring and tedious scientific books. It was only when he sat in the Führer position that he felt he still lacked the ability. Fortunately, he is good at listening to opinions and isn't as complacent as his predecessor. No matter Guderian or Baron Strucker, what they said seemed to be reasonable. "You misunderstood my meaning. The Empire's war plan, of course, is still under Guderian's plan, but we can make some changes in the details." A glint passed through Baron Strucker's eyes as he smiled and said, "General, it's all for the Empire. Let me think about it again." General Sankt stared at the map on the wall and saw the gradually falling Empire. His heart was a little shaken. At the camp outside London, a rather fiery ideological atmosphere prevailed as a group of men could be seen practicing. Luke took Dr. Zola with him and stood on a hill not far away. Those soldiers who had been successfully transformed have undergone tremendous changes in height and physique. Looking at strong men with a height of 2 meters, wearing a white short-sleeved T-shirt, the very obvious outlined bulging muscles. Luke was worried that their overdeveloped muscles would tear their clothes and then stage a sudden burst of exciting scenes. This was a week after the implementation of the Allied Superman program. Over 300 people were the first recipients, and only 26 people managed to survive 3 mutations. As for the 24th variations, the battleship class, only Captain America did it. In Stephanie's words, "Captain Rogers is the most amazing test subject I have ever seen." But even after several painful transformations, they weren't ready for the battlefield. Just yesterday, an inflated soldier felt so powerful that he tried to lift a jeep parked in the camp. Before he could do so, the whole man's skin ruptured and his bones broke. He was mercilessly crushed into a pulpy mass by the jeep. Stephanie specifically explained this accident. Now, those soldiers were like half-built planes. Trying to take off forcibly would only cause the body to collapse. It takes a period of training and adaptation to become a real tank class and battleship class soldier. "Dr. Zola, you've been involved in Worden's blood research for quite some time. How much do you know about the composition of the red crystals and the principle of transforming the human body? Luke looked out into the distance, his mind floating. Allied Command has sent word that 3 battleship classes have been deployed from Berlin, leading an army and forming battle squadrons. Right now, no one on the battlefield can stop them. According to the information obtained by the Strategic Science Reserve, Siegmund's battle squadron is advancing to the east. Although at the beginning of the battle, the Soviets stubbornly held their positions. However, due to the heavy losses of soldiers and weapons, they had to retreat. Siegfried's battle squadron recaptured Ploesti and secured the Third Reich's oil supply. This made Axis powers, which had already lost momentum, appear to have seen a glimmer of hope for a rise. Sieglin's battle squadron was active in Free French territory, and the entire force, led by an Aryan Superman, penetrated the Allied defensive lines and pushed straight to Paris. 2 days ago, Charles de Gaulle made a public speech on the radio. He said that he would insist on resistance, never retreat, and will liberate France. Despite the official rhetoric, the situation of the Allies wasn't optimistic, and they are losing ground on the battlefield. Luke reckoned it won't be long before the Allies send someone to invite him over. After all, saying a lot of pretty words aren't as effective as taking practical actions. If Berlin's battleship classes continues to advance without any obstacles, London might as well surrender with a white flag. Brigadier General, sir, the composition of those red crystals is very odd and can't be fully analyzed for a while. Although the synthesis process is simple, the yield is low, and the cultivation time is about 6 months. Dr. Zola was respectful, like an intern who reported to his boss. It has the effect of stimulating the body's cells and catalyzing growth. But because the process is relatively straightforward and brutal, it can cause a degree of painful reactions from the subject. For you, General, the effect of Worden's blood is almost negligible. If an ordinary man is a bowl, and a super soldier like Captain Rogers is a barrel, then you are the ocean. The first 2 could widen the amount of water they can carry through external forces, but you don't need it at all. Luke gladly accepted Dr. Zola's praise and felt that this Hydra chief scientist could become a top-notch employee. He speaks well and is efficient. He is a talented person who was worth collecting. However, Brigadier General, sir, I have other findings. Dr. Zola looked up and glanced at him and found Luke's face calm, unable to see any specific emotion. Flattery and compliments wouldn't easily impress the young general, so it was better to show one's ability. Then, Dr. Zola said, after deciphering the ancient document brought by Miss Stephanie and referring to the 3 battleship class in Berlin, I have a bold idea. Perhaps Worden's blood's true purpose isn't to strengthen the body, but to transform cells into a more efficient medium for storing energy. That's why the Aryan Superman in Berlin was able to unleash an amazingly destructive energy attack directly through his eyes. However, due to the low conversion rate of the energy stored in the body cells, the absorption couldn't keep up with the output, and even the battleship class could only last for 8 hours in combat. Luke nodded with a satisfied smile on his lips. Dr. Zola's idea is fascinating and may be the closest to the correct answer. If I want you to improve it a little bit, ignore the strengthening of the human body and focus on increasing the energy conversion rate of the cells in the body. Can you do that? Luke asked in a gentle tone. He had long wanted to develop Superman's heat vision ability, and Worden's blood is just the thing to do it. There's no need to bask in the sun quietly. Sometimes using external force was a good idea. Dr. Zola thought for a moment, then nodded his head and said, "No problem. With the help of that ancient document, it isn't tricky to fulfill Luke's request. However, Brigadier General, sir," Hydra's chief scientist hesitated, reminding, "Worden's blood stimulates the human body with side effects. It shortens the life cycle, and the more you use the ability, the more it consumes." Ancient Brood developed Worden's blood technology to produce war machines. They didn't want to create a new and perfect superhuman race. Therefore, it's reasonable that it had defects. Don't worry about it, Dr. Zola. Luke didn't have any reaction after hearing that. Although he didn't know how long the Kryptonians' natural lifespan is, he thought it would be no less than that of Asgardians, who often lived over 1,000 years. For humans, A few decades may account for most of their lives. But in the eyes of other races, this may be just a short period. If Kryptonians were determined to survive, they may have lived long after the planet exploded. This thought flashed through Luke's mind. But the idea of this planet beneath the feet was likely the heart of one of the cosmic entities, eternity. An explosion wasn't too realistic. Rogers is a stubborn guy. Accepting the Warden's blood transformation and shortening the life cycle isn't a big problem in Luke's opinion. However, for Captain America, who is a normal human being, it was worse. Luke also especially reminded Rogers before taking part in this project. Unfortunately, the latter didn't choose to back down. "I want to see the results as soon as possible," Luke said indifferently as he collected his thoughts. There isn't much time left for him and the Allies. Bletchley Manor, the temporary headquarters of the Strategic Science Reserve. Carter, wearing a civilian uniform, held 2 telegrams in her hand, and her flat-heeled shoes made clicking sounds on the stairs. As soon as she pushed the door open, she heard Luke lazily say, "Let me guess. The Allies want me to lead an attack, go to Paris to stop Sieglin's advance." I remembered 2 days ago. The Prime Minister calmly said that the Allies could hold up for the time being, so we shouldn't feel too much pressure. The leader of the Strategic Science Reserve sat by the window, with his long legs on the edge of the window sill and his chair tilting backward to maintain balance. The afternoon sun came in and fell on his body. The whole person seemed to be immersed in warm light, making people who saw it feel calm and drowsy. "Did you hear me talking downstairs?" Carter put away one of the telegrams because Luke guessed it completely. The Allies couldn't hold out in the end and decided to send their own Superman to give the Germans a good show. No one thought that the Third Reich would take the initiative to attack, and it has only been a short time since the truce. General Sank's speed in rectifying the chaos and stabilizing the situation was somewhat unexpected by the Allied higher-ups. "What about the other one?" The female agent put her hands behind her back as if to prevent Luke from peeking. "The President's praise." After all, the only recent victory for the Allies was when I took out the Berlin tank-class soldier. If I wasn't in London, the President certainly couldn't wait to give me the Major General rank. Luke said with his eyes closed. The Allies urgently needed a victory to inspire people, and even more, needed a powerful soldier to stop the Third Reich's advance. As for the right candidate, there was no doubt that it was the young Brigadier General who is basking in the sun right now. Therefore, the White House felt the need to seriously pull together to avoid the British taking advantage of the situation. "You're right," Carter reacted with surprise. The second telegram was from the White House. "I still have a lot of qualities you don't know about, Peggy." Luke finished his leisure activity in the sun today, stood up, and said, "It's time to see Steve. I hope he could adapt to his transformed body and go to the battlefield with me." After these days of active training, the tank-class soldiers had reached operational standards. The battleship class, Rogers, is still being tested and couldn't be confirmed to participate in the battle for the time being. Ms. Stephanie said that Rogers adapted quickly. Carter blinked, paused, and asked, "I just talked with Colonel Phillips for a while. He was a little worried about you. Now that the Allies have a new Superman, your position may decline, and you will no longer be valued as before." Luke's eyes flashed, showing no evident emotion. Not mentioning the British Prime Minister and the White House President, they both treated him very well. This was just a particular case during the war. When the curtains fall and the smoke clears, the title of war hero would be worthless. But Luke was prepared. The military bigwigs he met through Colonel Phillips wouldn't be too far behind in his future success. Besides, he demonstrated enough ability. Getting rid of the futile Brigadier General rank and gaining an actual powerful position shouldn't be a problem. Luke had thought it over. When the war is over, the Strategic Science Reserve would be reorganized and put under his hand. This is the predecessor of SHIELD. Their future development is unlimited. As for the supermen who came out with serums and injections, Luke never took it seriously. A low success rate of 1 in 5,000, plus the cost of cultivation and the side effects of a shortened life cycle, made it difficult for them to enter the world stage. What the military cared about was always weapons that could be produced in batches. Warden's blood is just like Tony Stark's iron suit. It looks eye-catching, but it was unrealistic to promote. No one can threaten my position, Peggy. Luke smiled confidently. He will show the Allies that there is still a massive gap between Superman and superhumans challenging to bridge. All right, it's your style, Luke. Carter shrugged her shoulders, saying, You can always trust me, General Cavill. In the eyes of many, Luke is simply a legend that constantly created miracles and surprises people. No matter how unbelievable the things that come out of his mouth, people would feel normal. So much so that members of the Strategic Science Reserve had become accustomed to Luke's usual mantra of basic operations, don't be surprised, and took it as a classic line, which was often quoted. Now, as long as something unexpected happened, everyone could calmly say it's just basic operations. Outside London Army Camp, boom, a huge explosion. The blazing white energy formed a ring of light, like a bolt of lightning released. A Churchill infantry tank seemed to have been hit by several mines. Even with a solid and thick steel body, it was suddenly thrown to the ground. The flames rose to the sky, followed by an explosion. When the powerful wave dissipated, only a pile of burning wreckage remained. Is this the power of a super soldier after being enhanced once again? Luke, who stood not far away, smiled. He saw Captain America hurl his shield with force, tearing the air out with a sharp roar. The other tank fired a shell that directly flew out. Then, Rogers took a giant leap to catch the descending vibranium shield. With both hands, he abruptly broke the barrel of the tank. Yes, this is the battleship-class soldier. Stephanie, with her hands on her heart, looked at Captain America with a satisfied look and whispered, I focused on strengthening Captain Rogers' physical fitness and weakening his energy attack, which can improve his survival rate on the battlefield. Even if a naval cannon hit him, he would still have a chance of survival. What about the tank-class soldiers? The corners of Luke's mouth twitched. This was as if they were training Captain America to be a meat shield. The most poisonous hits, the thickest armor, sounds like a good fit for Rogers. After all, he was beaten so many times since he was a child and tenaciously survived. Yes, I made them into real tanks. Stephanie pushed her glasses. There weren't as many supermen on the Allied side as they do in Berlin. Therefore, they could only take the defensive route and hold on as long as possible. Good idea. Luke nodded and walked towards Rogers, who overturned 2 tanks in succession. How does being a Superman feel like? He asked with a smile. I've never been better, Rogers said excitedly. He felt a steady stream of strength in his body, like a flood of water rushing freely. Well, your pectoral muscles are indeed stronger than ever. Luke couldn't help but glance at it, not that he had some kind of indescribable thought about the American captain. The 2 pectoral muscles were too flashy and eye-catching. Is that all you noticed? Rogers was somewhat disappointed. He just overturned 2 tanks. What else? I've been punching tanks and kicking trucks for a long time, haven't I? That's nothing new, Luke said solemnly. He patted Captain America on the shoulder, indicating, You still have a long way to go, little brother. Now, the enemy was only the super soldiers of the Third Reich. The crisis to be dealt with in the future may be alien races, dimensional guards, and cosmic overlords. Those aren't the kind of problems a vibranium shield can solve. Steve, get ready to fight. Luke looked at the flaming tank wreckage and whispered, We are going to Paris. Paris placed Der Elatel. With Sieglinde as the core of the battle group, they took over the sparsely populated empty city without much effort. Since penetrating the Allied lines, they hadn't encountered any decent resistance. Regular troops or sporadic resistance forces were as vulnerable as unarmed children in front of Sieglinde. The bazooka rocket launchers of the Allied forces and tank group artillery bombardment didn't play a prominent role. Berlin sent a telegram, an hour later begun bombing. Under the Arc de Triomphe, the senior officer wearing the Hydra armband shouted. The cold voice echoed through the empty star-shaped square and carried far away. Standing at the top of the Arc de Triomphe, Sieglinde looked out at the silent city, frowning, as if puzzled. As early as the 1940s, the Third Reich carried out blitz invasions of several lowland countries in Western Europe. With the roar of tanks and artillery, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg surrendered one after another and became occupied areas. Once the European hegemon, France ultimately gave up its resistance after the German army bypassed the Maginot Line and began to attack the south. As a result, Paris became an undefended city. Like a pitiful naked girl, she was ravaged by the big German man and ravaged wantonly. The French government, which was supposed to organize a last-ditch rebellion, made a surprisingly quick decision to go into exile in Tours, western France. Seeing the politicians sitting on the throne running away, the remaining 2 million Parisians also fled with them. Afterward, the French government claimed that if they continue to resist, they will only cause the unnecessary sacrifice of soldiers and civilians, and Paris, with its long tradition as a civilization, will be flattened and reduced to rubble. To preserve the light of civilization in Paris and the life and property of the French people, they should simply surrender. It was necessary to say that these people were really logical geniuses, and the Allies had simply found a treasure. So, when the torrent of German steel passed through the Place de la Concorde, it met no decent resistance at all. Paris, known as the City of Love, is under the shadow of the Third Reich. You should know that at that time, France was the country with the strongest armed forces. There were tens of thousands of large-caliber guns, over 2 million infantries, and over 3,000 tanks. In the end, no one expected that it took only 40 days for the French to surrender. It lasted 36 days, Greece successfully resisted for 56 days, and Norway lasted almost a few months. In contrast, as the dominant player in Europe, France really looked awful, so much so that it later became a well-known tragedy. Since then, a variety of insulting remarks emerged, gradually forming a trend. For example, no one can take over Paris before France surrenders. The French military salute is to raise your hands above your head. Only diminutive men and women can save France, and so on. I don't understand why the general wants me to take over an uninhabited city. Paris has long fallen, and even though it was taken back by the Allies, it has little value. Under the dense night sky, Sieglind crossed her arms in front of her chest, wondering. She was one of the battleship class created by Berlin. She has long golden hair, considered a trait of Aryan noble bloodline, which falls behind her shoulders in a long braid. She is nearly 2 meters tall, physically fit, strong and powerful, and emitted a strong aura. No one could take her lightly. At Sieglind's heels were the tank class, soldiers in heavy German armor, a total of 34 men. Originally, there were 40 men. 6 soldiers were sacrificed against tanks, snipers, and rocket launchers. They were scattered around the Arc de Triomphe, maintaining necessary vigilance. Such a team penetrated the Allied lines in Free France and pushed its way unimpeded to Paris, scaring the Allied top brass. This was the battle plan developed by General Guderian. In another hour, the whole of Paris will be in flames. The senior officer with the Hydra armband, standing under the arch, tilted his head and shouted. The bombing of Paris was an order given by Berlin. This morning, the Third Reich made a threatening public speech to the Allies. The other side claimed that unless the Western Allies withdrew to their own territory and announced their surrender, London and New York will be reduced to rubble, just like Paris. Why do I get the impression that he wants the Allies to put all their forces in Paris? Sieglind narrowed her eyes and jumped off the Arc de Triomphe. Falling from a height of 50 meters to the ground did not affect this female battleship-class soldier. With a slight bend in her legs, she removed the force of her fall and walked up to the senior officer. Tell me, what kind of surprise did Hydra prepare for the Allies? Sieglind looked at the senior officer who came to supervise the war. She was a head taller than the other, and she spoke with a condescending tone. You don't need to know, Miss Claudia. The senior officer called Sieglind by her real name and whispered, You are a weapon of the Third Reich. Your only task is to execute orders and obey. My name is Sieglind. This battleship-class female soldier raised her eyebrows. The blonde hair hanging down to her waist fluttered suddenly. That's the character in the opera. The reason why General Sankt gives you such a name is just. Before the senior Hydra officer could finish speaking, Sieglind quickly extended her right hand and grabbed her opponent directly by the neck. She lifted the guy as if she was lifting a chicken. To her, the human body is as fragile as a piece of paper, which could be crumpled at any time. I am Sieglind, the Valkyrie of the Empire. This is the honor bestowed upon me by the general. And what I ask, you answer. Don't talk too much. This isn't Berlin. It's prevalent for soldiers to die on the battlefield. Sieglind's lips pursed, and a cold smile escaped. The wispy white energy around her body resembled curved arcs of electricity that kept jumping. If she wanted to, she could turn this self-righteous coward into a pile of charcoal in just a few moments. General Sankt decided to put the final battlefield in Paris to attract the attention of allies, forcing the allies to counterattack by sending their underdeveloped supermen. The senior officer wearing the Hydra armband isn't some stubborn, weak-minded person. After being threatened with words by Sieglind, he told her what he knew, who told him to see it with his own eyes. This battleship-class female soldier blasted a tank into scrap metal. Countless Allied soldiers have died at the hands of the other party, and there's no need to become one of those poor souls. The final battlefield means that the Superman of the Allied countries may come. Sieglind loosened her palm and ignored the senior Hydra officer, who was shivering with fear. All three battleship classes are very interested in the Allied Superman, a legendary war hero by Roosevelt and Churchill. If they could wring the other side's head, it will undoubtedly bring a devastating blow to the Allies' morale. Do I want this credit? Sieglind thought so. She and Siegmund were unhappy that only Siegfried was honored by the Führer. General Sankt was busy stabilizing the situation in Berlin and completely ignored this problem. The so-called Aryan supermen were no different from other soldiers. They also need to be recognized. They need a medal that symbolizes honor, not just as a propaganda object for the Axis powers. I wish the Allied Superman would come sooner so that I could get an Iron Cross. Spare that bastard Siegfried from showing off his Knight's Cross awarded by the deceased. Sieglind's thoughts diverged, and she quietly waited for the bombing. 40 minutes later, she suddenly raised her head, her eyes condensed a little and looked into the distance. In the night sky, where the stars and moon are dim, there seemed to be several transport planes flying over. Vaguely, one can see that it was the flag of the Allies.